Finally, we come to the finally block. As mentioned previously, the finally block is for code that needs to run regardless of whether an error was detected or not. So with this block, we can cover every possible situation. The try block contains some code to attempt or to try. The except block contains the instructions for what to do if an error is encountered. The else block contains instructions for what to do if no error was encountered. And the finally block contains instructions for what to do whether an error was encountered or not. So when might we need a finally block? Well, imagine if we expected the file that we were reading in to just contain numbers, and we planned to change those numbers to the types int. That's what we're doing right here. We're reading each line in the file, and each line is being converted to an integer. Then the error we would anticipate would be a value error. Now in practice, we would also want to anticipate an I/O error on the file input, but we'll remove that for now and come back to it later. The trick here is that even if an error is encountered while reading the file, we still want to close the file at the end. Here we're basically assuming that the file definitely got opened successfully, so if we encountered an error while reading from the file based on the contents of it, then we still need to close the file at the end. So that's why we put inputFile.close in the finally block. InputFile.close is a method that closes that file, and we want to do that whether or not an error was encountered. So note a couple things real quick. First, notice that we move the open line outside of the try block. That's because, as I said, for now, we're assuming that we know this won't generate an error. We'll see a more full version of how to do this in a second. But once again, that means that the only code inside the try block is the code that we anticipate to potentially generate an error. Second, notice that we kept a loop inside the try block, even though the line that contains the error, or that could potentially contain the error, is inside the loop. Technically, we could put the try block inside the loop as well. With the try block on the outside of the loop, if any iteration of the loop generates an error, it will jump straight down to the except block. If we instead only wrapped line 7 in a try-catch block, then a single line generating an error would not prevent the rest of the file from being read. We'll see an example of that in a second. The main takeaway here, though, is that the code in the finally block is run regardless of whether any errors occurred or not. Now, this might leave you with a question. Couldn't we just put the line that we want to run regardless outside of the try-catch block? The except block is going to prevent the code from crashing if an error is encountered, and so it's guaranteed to ultimately continue running after the try-catch block. So why don't we just put that code there? We'll talk about that next.